The reality on the ground suggests that the prospects for a full, comprehensive peace are somewhat low. There are plentiful spoilers on all sides, and the leaderships in the region, and some would even argue beyond, are perhaps politically weak or are not in the position to take some risks. In the interim, policy communities throughout the Western world, more so in Europe but now also in the US, are reaching a simplistic reading of the Middle East, rather evident to those following the events in Egypt. Most European opinion shapers and a growing number of Americans would contend, with regards to the Arab-Israeli conflict, that Israel is the main, if not sole, obstacle. Solve the Palestinian issue and the Middle East would instantly and positively transform. I wish. The problem with this vision is that it ignores reality. Officials and experts and increasingly leading Jewish figures are adopting a discourse perceived as delegitimizing Israel, crossing a thin line between criticizing legitimate, even if perceived wise, unwise, or wrong Israeli decisions, to outright delegitimizing of such actions, in complete disregard of the political complexity on the ground. How does one define the blurry fault line between criticism and prejudice? Again, I would take what Tony Blair has suggested. You may agree with the government of Israel or disagree, but this does not render actions illegitimate or unlawful. In face of recent events in Egypt, previous experience with Israeli withdrawals from Gaza and Lebanon, you may disagree with the hesitations of the government in pursuing the peace process, but you ought to at least understand them and appreciate their sources, especially if you want to affect change. Condescending usually does not prevail, nor does delegitimizing the perspective of your interlocutor. What ought to be done? One of the main, but not sole, deficiencies in countering the assault on Israel's legitimacy, particularly in Europe, is the absence of an informed, unbiased, professional debate in the political and media spheres concerning the Middle East. We need to bring more young and mid-career professionals the sort of Taglit visits to Israel. Emphasis on more. Ask Lorna how effective the missions of journalists are. We need more student exchanges, more international programs like IDC's International School. In Europe, our battle is far more difficult. We need think tank activity in Europe on the Middle East, unbiased, professional. We need university centers on Middle East in Europe. We need chairs of Israel in Europe. We need professional exchanges. We need a more balanced approach out there. In short, we ought to do what all normal countries are doing, Western and Middle Eastern. It might not solve all the issues, but it might take us one step further. Thank you very much.
Fundamental aspects of diplomatic activity and international activity occur on that front, which is called public diplomacy. Two developments have contributed to this very much. One is the technological developments, which gives each and every one of us the ability to function as actors in this arena. The other key factor is the establishment of the networks, but networks that are stronger in power than states, the ability of information to cross borders, geographical borders and political borders, and go from one place to another, and to form increasingly larger groups of people who share a common interest or who want to express an opinion on a certain subject. This pulls the rug out from under states and even international organizations to a large extent. These are the two most important new developments. Have we learned these areas, and have we learned how to adapt ourselves to them? And my answer is no. The answer is a double no. One, because of our unwillingness to understand that, especially in the last decade, although even before to a certain extent as well, but we refuse to understand that public diplomacy is based on what is called soft power. Our hard power, the power of military might and economic might. Those are important and they make achievements when necessary, but they are no longer enough in order to succeed on the diplomatic front. The United States knows how to use it. Britain knows how to use it. Everyone in their own way, in their own place, not always successfully, but at least they have internalized the importance of it and made it part of the system. We refuse to realize that in public diplomacy we have to use soft power, power that draws the enemy in and convinces him. When we in the Knesset, where I am a member, are passing resolutions to investigate the financing of certain organizations on a certain side of the map, that's a decision of the Knesset, we don't see what they are going to say about us in the United States and in Europe when we see that this is funding that comes from them and this is legitimate funding and funding that they provide to other states as well and to other organizations. And then we say, yes, we are a democracy, but we are a democracy of one kind or another. And that is the place where we ourselves are weakening ourselves in an area that is so important and so strong here, democracy, which is such an important tool in public diplomacy and soft power. We refuse to internalize the idea that we are involved in a new type of war. We refuse. We think that we're always going to manage using the means that gave us our victories in the past. And if we can't internalize that in the debates that are held in advance of military operations. For example, in the case of the interception of the flotilla from Turkey, we don't take these aspects into account, or else we take them into account only at the last moment and in a very poor way. The state of Israel needs a single central body that has the ability both in operations and guidance in the area of public diplomacy, and beyond that, it needs the budget at very low costs that can in no way be compared to the investments we put into the other fronts, whether we're talking about the force building in the army or other areas. We do not invest even 0.001% in preparation for the battlefield of public diplomacy.
Greatest non-violent threat posed to all democracies is lawfare. The use of the law as a weapon of war to, amongst other things, delegitimize the right of democratic states to defend themselves against terrorism and to exert sovereign control over their territory. And this is especially true when it comes to Israel and the United States, for which every act of delegitimization lawfare has shared consequences. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a colleague of mine in the United States military about the Goldstein report. When the report first came out, everybody was talking about the political and the legal implications it would have for Israel. And on the phone, I was complaining to him how international law was being deliberately misapplied and abused to delegitimize the right of Israel to exist as a state for the Jewish people with equal rights in the world community. And he interrupted me and he said, Brooke, you know, you've got it wrong. The Goldstein report is not just about Israel. It's about creating precedents in international law that can and will be used against coalition forces fighting in Iraq, fighting in Afghanistan, using the same techniques and methods that the Israelis are using on the battlefield against the same types of terrorists that are engaging in asymmetric warfare, suicide, homicide, bombing, hiding behind civilians, etc. And the more I thought about it, the more I tended to agree with him, because Israel is now being used on the legal battlefield, just as it has always been used on the physical battlefield, as the canary in the coal miner's tunnel, as a guinea pig, as a legal testing ground for lawfare actions aimed at frustrating and hindering the ability of a democracy to fight and to win the war against terrorism. No, the question is not who is the target, but one of mens rea, one of intent. What is the intention behind the legal action? Is it to pursue justice? Is it to apply the law in the interests of freedom and democracy? Or is the intent to undermine the very system of laws being manipulated? Is the party behind the action exhibiting bias? Do they have an ulterior motive? And finally, does the action fall within a greater lawfare strategy to attack not just Israel, but to challenge the legitimate rights of a democracy to defend itself and to exert control over its territory? Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, in political warfare, which is the context in which we are fighting for our very existence, words are weapons. And I think it behooves us to think very carefully and vigilantly before we become the weapons supplier of our opponents. It was, in fact, the source of our legitimacy is not traced or rooted in the 1947 partition plan, is it? It is rooted in the modern period, in the beginning of last century, when Israel was the only country in the 192-member UN system whose rights to sovereignty were twice affirmed, first by the League of Nations in 1922, and then through Article 80 of the United Nations Charter. And the language which many of you know that was used by the international community was the right of the Jewish people to reconstitute their home in that country. Reconstitute means that there was a prior claim and an international recognition of a prior claim. That is the root of our legitimacy. And it is with that that I say yes to peace. We should say yes to diplomacy, yes to this possibility of a two-state solution, but yes to readopting our own language, yes to readopting our own narrative based on our rights. Because only then, ladies and gentlemen, can we stand confidently as an international Jewish community, as the nation state of the Jewish people in Israel and around the world, to defeat those in London and those in Berkeley who will increase and are increasing the assault on our fundamental rights as the Jewish people in our own nation state. Thank you very much.
I have had death threats because of what I've done. I went to university with the people that bombed the Israeli embassy. So to say that there has an escalation in the problem belies the fact that in Britain and lots of places that there has been a problem for a long time. And we do ourselves no favours by actually trying to escalate the problem. BICOM is the home of the most empirical research in Britain, full stop, on what every British person, class, dissection, you name it, thinks about Israel, about terror. And I'll surprise you, okay? Because, yes, the support is getting phenomenally soft. They will not support the state of Israel as a Jewish state unequivocally without saying that they also support a Palestinian state. But they also get in amazing North Korean-style numbers the threat that Iran poses to Britain, not just Israel. They even support, in the high, nearly 50% of the British people support military action against Iran. The top two reasons they think peace has not been achieved in the Middle East is Hamas rejectionism and state-sponsored terror by Iran and other countries. We play our enemy's game if we presume everybody is against us, because we will be having a conversation with ourselves. And have we learnt nothing when we talk the language of the other? Please, I make a plea to you, is do not presume that everybody is against you, because eventually it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy.